Hey, welcome to the Deeper Bible Podcast. We're a show that digs deep into the beauty of Scripture, big ideas in theology and philosophy, and practical wisdom for today. And that wisdom, the wisdom of God, is for everyone. So if today's show is helpful for you, why don't you click like or leave a comment or review? You can share with a friend. That helps God's truth get further and further in the world. So my name's Ryan. I'm sitting here with my friend Lindsay, and today we're going to talk about one of the most important and puzzling aspects of life, which is the relationship between God's will, or in technical theological terms, God's providence, and our will.
Yeah.
And it's ultimately at bottom a question of control. How much am I in control of my own life, in my own planning, in my own forecasting, and how much of it is just completely in God's ballpark?
Right.
And this is a deep philosophical issue, but also a very pragmatic day-to-day issue as I'm making decisions. How do I thread the needle between God's will and my will? So
It's a good thing to talk about.
you know what?
Think
People
about
have been
it
talking
often.
about it for hundreds and hundreds of years, but at the end of this show, we will have it solved.
We'll have it all solved.
It will be solved. Yes.
Oh, that's great. Okay, shall we talk?
Let's do it.
Before we kick off too much farther, Providence.
Yes.
What can you talk a little bit about
It's
this
a town in New
big
Hampshire.
word? In this context?
Oh.
Can you talk about it?
Yes. So Providence it's a typical smush of two Latin terms in this case.
Okay.
The pro means beforehand, and the vide, or the second part of the word, means to see. So
For to
provide means to see beforehand.
Okay.
So the idea of providence is that God sees beforehand
Mhm.
things that we don't see. He sees ahead in time. And this is where we get a word like provision. When you provide for somebody, you provide for your kids. You see ahead of time what they're going to need,
Sure.
and they don't see it.
Right.
So you're exercising providence in their life.
Okay.
And so that's the idea there, that we see there's this big parade of our lives, but we only see through a knothole in the fence. We see a narrow bandwidth at any one time. God sees over the fence. He can see the beginning and the end of the parade. And so when we trust him, because he's got our best interests in mind, when we at some level acknowledge he knows better than me, that's where our trust in divine providence kicks in. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So God's providence is what God sees that we don't see.
Yes.
Is that what it's?
Yes. And what that's getting at a deep level is saying that there's a gap between our perception of reality and reality itself.
Right.
And that our judgments, our decisions may produce results that are unintended because we don't have the capacity to factor in all the unknowables,
Right.
but God does. And so what it's ultimately driving towards is a view of human nature that is bounded, that is finite, and that, it's a good preacher saying, where I end, God begins. But at a certain profound level, like, let's pretend with this table here, let's pretend this is all of reality as it exists.
Okay.
Whatever I can see at any given time is this small circle right here. And for me, that's everything. That's everything I'm aware of. But the reality itself is orders of magnitude bigger.
Right.
And so the idea of providence shines this light into the gap between what I mean by the word knowledge and what knowledge means for God.
Right.
And trying to move forward in our lives with that balance in mind. So this is a mystery. The philosopher Soren Kierkegaard famously said that we can only understand our lives backwards.
Yeah.
But we have to live them forwards. The hindsight is 20/20 idea. But because of that, at any given moment in life, we can never fully understand our lives. In the rearview mirror, it's like, oh, that all worked out great. Boy, it's good on me.
Now I see.
Go back and read my journals.
Yeah.
I had no idea where all this was going,
It's true.
And this gets also to some very important cultural issues. We live in a culture, but all cultures have been this way, where there's been a premium on forecasting what's going to come next.
Sure.
Whether it's economic forecasts,
Yeah.
weather forecasts,
Where?
right? But political forecasts. I mean,
Yeah.
it's April 2024 right now.
Yeah.
Who knows who's going to win the election in November 2020? You may
Right.
be watching this after November 2024.
It's true.
From our vantage, we don't
We don't
know.
Yeah.
And one of the things that a lot of like top flight social scientists, psychologists, statisticians have pointed out in the last 20 years is how bad we are at predicting things in general, from picking stocks that will do well to all sorts of, whether it's military strategy or any complex system that into which humans forecast the way it's going to go. We very often are bad at that, and this gets to the question of what philosophers or theologians mean by the word anthropology. That what it doesn't mean like, let's go off to some tribe somewhere and study their interesting practices. Anthropology in this sense means like, what is our model of human nature, and particularly of human rationality? And Thomas Sowell down at Stanford has pointed out that there's kind of two different buckets of anthropology that different worldviews have fallen into. One is a constrained vision of human nature. One is an unconstrained vision. So the constrained vision, which is the classical religious vision, says that we're bounded. There's only so much that we can know. We can rail against that, but it is true. Mm-hmm. The unconstrained vision, which is the hallmark of modernity in many ways, is very optimistic that there's no limit to what we can know. It's unconstrained. We can continue to grow and develop and forecast and see. In principle, it's limitless.
Okay.
And so, but the Bible seems to be squarely in the constrained vision department.
Yes. Okay.
Without being a downer about human nature, without saying shut up and obey.
Right.
But the Bible strikes a balance, and part of that balance is you're a finite creature.
Yes. Yes. Where God plans, but we're also called to partner with him and therefore somewhat plan. So what does the Bible say? Like, how do we navigate this mystery?
Yes. So that is something that the author of Proverbs comes back to again and again. Mm-hmm. And he comes at it many different aspects.
Yeah.
But I've put together actually a list for us
yes, you have.
Of different scriptures.
Okay.
Would you mind? We've got, I don't know, maybe 10 scriptures. And I think each of these in different ways speak to what can be in our control and what is not in our control.
Okay.
And figuring out where that boundary is.
And these are all Proverbs.
These are all from the book of Proverbs.
Okay.
Yep.
So we're going to start with Proverbs 3, verses 5 through 8. And it says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths. Be not wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord, and turn away from evil. It will be healing to your flesh and refreshment to your bones."
So I think an important statement there is do not lean on your own understanding.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't say do not use your own understanding.
Yes, exactly.
It just says don't lean on it ultimately.
Right.
And then and he will make your path straight.
Right.
So that's getting a little bit to the nub of the issue. Okay, go for it.
Right. Okay. We're going to move on to chapter 4, verse 19. "The way of the wicked is like deep darkness. They do not know over what they stumble." Okay, interesting. All right, chapter 12, verse 15 of Proverbs. "The way of a fool is right in his own eyes, but a wise man listens to advice." Okay, chapter 14, verse 12, and then this is also going to be chapter 16,
right.
verse 25.
This one's a double.
We got a twofer here. Mm-hmm. Okay, "There is a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way to death." Mm-hmm. Okay, chapter 16, verse 1, "The plans of the heart belong to man, but the answer of the tongue is from the Lord." Ooh, that's good. Okay, we're going to get to this topic, but of the heart. But okay, keep going. Chapter 16, verse 9. "The heart of a man plans his way, but the Lord establishes his steps." That's a great summary. Chapter 19, verse 21. "Many are the plans in the mind of a man, but it is the purpose of the Lord that will stand." You want to talk about that one?
Well, let me just mention. So what it translates there is mind. Many are plans in the mind of a man. I'd have to check, but I'm 95% sure it's the same underlying word in Hebrew.
Okay.
It's the same underlying word as heart.
Mind and heart?
Mind and heart. It's the same word. In Hebrew, it's lev.
Okay.
And what lev means in Hebrew is essentially your interiority. So it's both, it has an emotional component. It also has what we would call a cognitive or mental or analytical component. Ancient Hebrew anthropology does not draw a clear line between our emotions and our thoughts, like we often do.
Yes.
That's not logical. That's emotional.
Yeah.
For Hebrew thing, all of that is under the lev.
Yeah.
Or levav is another related term. But I just wanted us, because you just read the word mind, but that's the same category in Hebrew as heart.
As heart.
Yes.
Okay. Because sometimes we'll be like, oh, like you're thinking with your heart. And that's some people saying that you're not actually using your mind.
Right. Exactly.
But in this context, it's kind of one and the same.
Mm-hmm.
Heart and mind.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Are we on 21:2?
Yes, we are.
Okay. So Proverbs 21 verse 2, every way of a man is right in his own eyes, but the Lord weighs the heart. And the last, I think it's the last one, right? Yep. Chapter 28 verse 26, whoever trusts in his own mind, literally the heart, is a fool, but he who walks in wisdom will be delivered.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I want to circle back to
Yeah.
something caught your eye on 16:1. What was it?
The plans of the heart belong to man, but the answer of the tongue is from the Lord. It's just, first of all, it's pretty graphic with like the heart and then the tongue.
Mm-hmm.
It just, hold on, I gotta read it again. The plans of the heart belong to man, but the answer of the tongue is from the Lord. It just made me pause because there's a lot to digest there.
Yeah.
What are some of your thoughts on that one?
I think I was reading some commentaries on that. Often heart and tongue, two body parts.
Mm-hmm.
The Hebrews knew there's this like thumping somewhere in there.
Right.
And they would also call that the heart. But they would also use it in a metaphorical sense as well. These two body parts are often paired to indicate what is internal and what is external.
Yeah.
Because with the tongue, I'm putting things out into the world. I could be thinking things in my heart, but if I don't give voice to them with my tongue.
Is it ruach? Is that the same but different?
That's a different word.
Okay, never mind.
Ruach means...
But it's like that what is going out from.
Yes.
Is, I guess what I was getting at.
Yeah. Ruach is kind of in a different conversation, actually. Yeah. It's related a little bit to the word for heart, lev.
Okay.
And ruach can either mean like wind, it can mean breath, it can mean God's spirit.
Okay.
It could also mean the spirit of a person.
Yeah.
Like I have my own spirit. There's not a very clear line between like the spirit and the heart.
Yeah.
Say in ancient Hebrew thinking. However, the spirit of God is different than the spirit of humans. So anyways, this is it's called pneumatology. I
think where my brain was connecting it was like what is locked up in your mind is not spoken out, but then the tongue is what puts it out there into the world to be received. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Okay, keep going.
To be honest with you, that's one of the verses that I don't really know fully what it means. Okay. I'm like, the answer of the tongue is from the Lord. Okay. Next verse. Okay. I don't really get it.
All right. Okay, so with we went off on a little tangent there, but with all of this scripture in mind, what are we to take from this?
So I think there's several themes that are surfacing again and again.
Okay.
First of all, it's really important that you don't deceive anybody, and the easiest person to deceive is yourself.
Yes. Very true.
Like we are very, very prone to deluding ourselves.
Well, also because it's like locked in here, and there's no one to reason. Well, besides the Lord, I guess.
What about the 17 voices in my own mind? Our culture, the whole theme of trust your heart and everything, the Bible would be like, yeah, no, that's a terrible idea. Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, it explicitly said, I think the last verse you read, whoever trusts in his own heart is a fool.
Yeah.
And, Jeremiah famously says in Jeremiah 17:9, the human heart is desperately ill. And does anybody really understand how bad it is? No. So it's people who are self-confident in their own heart. The Bible would say, you're living in a fool's paradise. And your biggest problem is that you don't want to learn. You don't want to hear otherwise. You don't even entertain the possibility that maybe there's another way of looking at it.
Yeah.
And so we have exercised a certain caution about our own instinctive convictions. Mm-hmm. We're not the final judges of the rightness or the wrongness of our conduct. I mean, St. Paul says, he says like, look, I'm not aware of anything against me, but I'm not thereby acquitted. God is my ultimate judge. Even if, and this is what it says, the way of a person is right in their own eyes. We're all saying we're all so reflexively self-righteous and so good at telling ourselves stories about why they are evil and doing me wrong. And I'm the victim and they are bad.
Yeah.
But the Bible's not impressed with that.
Right.
So I was like, well, congratulations, you're self-righteous. So is everyone.
No one is righteous, not even one.
Right.
Yeah.
And but the right response then is to that limitation of our own, the accuracy of our own inner world.
Yeah.
The right response is not to be like, well, screw it, and just be arrogant, nor is it to say, I guess I can't know anything, and to despair.
Mm-hmm.
The right response is humility and trust
Mm-hmm.
to say, well, there's things I don't know, but I know someone who does know them, and I'm going to trust him. And so it's trying to create a life posture of trust. Back to what we were saying in Proverbs 3. Don't lean on your own understanding, but it doesn't mean don't use your own understanding.
Yeah.
Use that thing.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people get in this false spirituality that says, the more spiritual I am, the less I'm going to think.
Right.
And I'm just going to go with the spirit. I'm going to go with the flow because I'm uber spiritual. Sorry, but that flies in the face of a great deal of the Bible, which says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind.
Mm-hmm.
Be renewed in knowledge day after day.
Mm-hmm.
So it's becoming more mature spiritually is about thinking more and thinking more clearly and with, using this part of our mind and importantly, knowing its own limitations as well.
Right.
These kinds of issues may seem irrelevant. They may seem extremely sort of abstract, but they are our assumptions in this area are in the background when we make life decisions, small or large.
Yeah.
About how trustworthy are my own instincts, my own calculations. And so it's extremely relevant to the way that we live our lives.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first thing.
Okay.
Self-deception's real.
Yeah.
Secondly, that hearing the will of God in our life is not like just a one-off revelation, like, oh yeah, one time back in the summer of 83, I heard God's, and boom, now the rest of my life. It is a continual process of pondering your path, of reflecting on how you're living, and multiple inputs from scripture, from wise counsel, from your life experiences. Sometimes there's divine revelation. God will like put something in your heart. Sometimes it's what you want to do. Sometimes God will put a desire in you, and that's from him. But here's for me something that's a huge curveball in this and has been very helpful for me. That the biggest question is, who are you becoming? As you move through life and you're trying to make decisions between your will and God's will and however that shakes out, the question isn't ultimately what you're going to be accomplishing or where you're going to be living or where you're going to go to school or what job or what. The bigger question is, who are you becoming? The philosopher Dallas Willard says this. He says, the main thing God gets out of your life is not the achievements you accomplish. It's the person that you become. And I think that I don't know, how does that land with you?
The main thing God gets out of your life is not the achievements you accomplish. It's the person you have become. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, that hits pretty hard home because as a artist and a creator, well, I guess this literally applies to all of us, right? We all have different goals and achievements, but as a creator, like you make things, and so if like what have I made, and how many things have I made?
Right.
Like sometimes I can let that be my measure of not even success, but even of God's blessing, in my life.
Right.
However, as I'm, getting older in my years, seeing what God is doing in my heart is bigger in my mind, and becoming more. And we say it a lot, but becoming more like Jesus, like that's the goal. Like that. Wanting to be in a rightness in my spirit is of greater value than creating material things. And I'm still learning that, still processing that. But I'm kind of seeing, like you talked about, like that fence and like seeing through like this little this little hole in the fence. The hole is getting like a little bigger, like where I'm like, I can see a little bit more maybe of what, Lord, you are trying to teach me. So much. It's not about some of these achievements, but it's about what you being greater in my mind and in my heart. Is that coming out the way it should?
Yes.
Making sense?
Yeah. And in the ministry world, I suppose this is true in any human endeavor, but like, the seductiveness of numbers, or the we can all say that we don't think this way.
Yeah.
But how we feel about ourselves very often tethers to
Yeah.
the numbers.
Yeah.
And I was actually just driving in this morning, and I had this moment when I just started laughing in the car by myself. Because I think for just this littlest moment, God gave me the glimpse, just tiny moment of how relative all of that is.
Yeah.
And it's just because there's always, I was reading in the Wall Street Journal a couple days ago, this talking about these sort of VIP conferences in far-flung places in Davos and Aspen and all these special places. And the article headline said there's always another level of VIP.
Totally.
So you might be the VIP of whatever, but you're looking over the fence and saying, God, I wish I was VIP like them people. And those people are saying, I wish I was VIP like those people. And it never ends. And, size of your church, book sales, podcast, market share, it's all relative.
Yeah. Plug in Ecclesiastes in there.
Yeah,
exactly. All for nothing.
Yeah. Give me a dose
I love
of
that book.
I do too. In fact, Ecclesiastes, when I was hanging on to faith by a skinny little thread, it was Ecclesiastes and Pontius Pilate who get me in the game.
Sure.
Pontius Pilate's what is truth? And I'm I'm with that guy. And then Ecclesiastes is it's all meaningless.
It's all meaningless.
I tried this, it sucks. I tried this, it doesn't matter. It's all, I'm with that guy. But there's actually some truth there. Maybe I'm just melancholic in my disposition, but it's shifting the framework to who am I becoming?
Yes.
That matters more than what do I do? What do I produce? That is so easy to say. That is really hard to really live into that,
It is. It is. And I mean, I love how we talk about loving God and loving people often, because that's a practical way to becoming more like who God has called us to be. Okay, when I'm going through okay, should I do this? Should I not? A practical way would be okay, does this love God? Okay, yes. Does this love people? Okay, yes. Okay, I think I can take a step forward then.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, yes, I hear you. Sometimes on staff we say, really our motto is loving God, tolerating people. No, we really do. We really do love people. but
I mean, that just speaks to it's not always easy. It's not always the most comfortable path to take.
A philosopher once said, we like because we love despite. I like you because of this, this, and this. I love you despite the fact that you are this and this and
Yeah.
Okay, so a couple other things that I think Proverbs is getting at.
Okay.
One, we should be wary of the easy path. The path that's just dude, that's so easy, and everybody's doing it. Be wary. You probably should dig under the surface a little bit. Jesus says, wide is the path that leads to destruction, and everybody's on it.
Right.
And so we have to moderate the herd instinct, where we're just well, everyone else is doing it. It must be. Actually, don't be gullible like that. Proverbs is also very clear that it's not about demeaning human planning or the human mind or the capacity to arrange things.
Yeah.
Get your stuff in order.
Yeah.
Because Proverbs rails against laziness too.
Yeah.
And people who don't grab the bull by the horns.
Right.
So human planning is a necessary but insufficient condition for success.
Yeah.
It's necessary, but it's not enough on its own. It also has to be in flow with God's providence, with God's design.
And that's also kind of a part of worship, right? Is to exercise our mind and exercise
Absolutely.
what God has given us.
Absolutely.
So, yes, it says do not lean on your understanding. It doesn't say don't use it.
Right.
But its foundation needs to be in alignment with the Lord, our understanding. So that's it.
Yes. Very good.
That's my little nugget of thought.
Okay. So the thing is, though, we've been talking, for me, what is it, very urgent. I have this decision this week. I'm hoping to hear from this week. However, if we open up the aperture a little bit, we are talking about an issue that has been one of the great battlegrounds of Christian thinking for the last thousands of years.
Yeah, there's lots of schools of thought, yeah.
Yes. So,
Within
very often in American Christian circles, people be like, oh yeah, the Calvinism and Arminianism thing. And very briefly, John Calvin, 16th century French lawyer who followed in the wake of Martin Luther and said, we're going to read the Bible fresh, not according to the traditions of the Catholic Church. Anyways, he really emphasized the sovereignty of God, the power of God, such that it seemed to marginalize or even erase human will or human volition.
Okay.
And this is where you get language of predestination. God has predestined certain people for heaven, predestined certain people for hell, even. This is called double predestination.
Okay.
That he's predestined both groups.
Okay.
God plays duck, duck, damn, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Well, the concern there was to say we're so committed to God's power that it's inconceivable that anything would ever go against his power.
Mm-hmm.
So even people who make choices that go against God's will, God willed the misapplication of their will. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, but then there's another group surrounding this guy named Arminius who really emphasized, no. God gave humans free will. He's not going to take that away from us. We have great influence on our eternal destiny. And so it's trying to tip the balance the other way to say, yes, God is powerful, but he's also created the world such that human choice has real consequences and is real.
Okay.
The thing is about that way of framing it, people say, oh, this is the Calvinism, Arminianism thing. The thing is that particular debate is just one of a series of debates in the history of theology that have all thematized around the same basic problems about God's will, God's power, God's knowledge, and human will, human power, human knowledge. I brought a book. This is by a thinker named Michael Allen Gillespie. It's called The Theological Origins of Modernity. This is a great book. Can't be an historian of the modern West without really grappling with the legacy of Christianity and Christendom. Why? Because for 1,000 years, from roughly 500 to 1500, ballpark, Christianity was the main game in town. And the power of the Roman Church, the power of the bishoprics, and the clergy was enormous, and it had political power, not just spiritual power, say. And what emerged out of the Enlightenment and modern thought was emerging out of and in dialogue with the legacy of Christendom. And so this is one of multiple studies that are out there that look at how that developed. And this guy's thread that he follows is precisely this topic.
Interesting.
And
Okay.
it gets down, one of the fundamental things it gets down to is how language works. Like if I say tree for that little fern in the corner, which is silk, probably. It is silk. It's definitely silk or something like that. Is there a fundamental connection between my word and that thing? One of the first things we see about humans in the Bible, God brings animals to Adam and Adam gives them names. Mm-hmm. And whatever their name was, that's what they were called.
Okay. Yeah.
The basic question is, how does human language correlate with objects in the world?
Mm-hmm.
And starting in the 13th century, a guy named William of Ockham and some other thinkers started to, out of concern to preserve the ultimate sovereignty, the providence of God, downgraded human language to say, our words don't connect with anything in reality, because what really matters is what God says about reality, and that overrides what humans say about reality. And this does seem abstract, but actually it ends up, ultimately it's a precursor to what becomes postmodernism in some ways, where postmodernism believes that language is fundamentally arbitrary. It doesn't latch on to anything. It's all, and that's another conversation, which I hope we get to have someday. Mm-hmm. But what I'm trying to say is, I'm trying to make us aware that this pragmatic issue in my life, God's will, my will, not thy will, but mine, thine be done. You know what Jesus prays in Gethsemane or whatever,
Yeah.
That issue also actually touches a very live nerve in the history of theology. And ultimately for me, the way that I solve this makes sense to me, is that God's will is that humans have will and use it. So even if I'm using my will against God's will,
Okay.
The very fact that I'm using the faculty of choice at all does mean that I'm operating as a creature as he intended.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that does make sense. And that's how, makes sense. And that's how I honor what the Lord has given me by like using it. Like if I
Yes.
just didn't use it,
Absolutely.
it wouldn't be what what he created. Like I wouldn't be operating in the way that he created me to operate.
Correct.
If I didn't use my mind, if I didn't honor him or worship him with my mind. Just like if something is not active, it dies,
Yes.
So like exercising it is doing right by the Lord.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah.
And even if, and at multiple levels,
Yeah.
because even if I make a wrong choice, the fact that I'm choosing at all means that I'm in step with his will, his choice, that I be a creature that has choice.
Yes.
It gets kind of meta,
Yeah.
but I actually think this solves the philosophical problem. And also, here's something we need to be aware of too. The way that Christian thinking has emerged since a few hundred years into church history has been in dialogue with Greek philosophy, which is committed to what's called the principle of non-contradiction, which means that something cannot simultaneously be X and not X. This is kind of gets theoretical, but the idea is you cannot contradict yourself. Truth does not contradict itself. The ancient Hebrews often said, reality is multi-layered, and there's paradox, and there's X and not X can be true sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
So a famous rabbi actually lived just shortly after the time of Jesus and Paul and all the New Testament people. His name's Rabbi Akiva.
Okay.
He's famous for saying this statement: all is foreseen, but freedom of choice is given.
All is foreseen, but freedom of choice is given.
Mm-hmm. And that's basically just saying both poles are true about God's ultimate power and our real choices. Both of those are true, and don't overly try to systematize that.
Sure.
We live in a world whose complexity exceeds our analytical capacity to make it into a pretty flow chart.
Yeah.
And so, I find that pretty satisfying personally.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm trying to think of like a good analogy for for this because I think in that way. But I guess so. Back to like the exercising our mind and whatnot. When a child is like learning to walk, right? The parent like encourages it, like get up, like let's give it a shot, give it a try. And surely they fall a few times, right?
Yep.
Surely we, in making our own decisions and using our mind, sometimes like we will fail, but like that's what like the parent's hand is for, is to like help guide that child along and grow and exercise, in this case, their legs until they're at a place where they are stronger. And Lord willing, they will walk with their parent for the rest of their life, right? In relationship. And so I think that's similar into how we can kind of apply this thought. Like, yes, we have our own will. Yes, God has his will. But it's supposed to be walking in alignment with each other. Us, using and exercising and running at a certain point, but it's always with the Lord our Father, in alignment with it.
That's a great analogy, because think if you're walking your daughter down the sidewalk, and you can hold her hand lightly because you're both moving in the same direction. But then if she runs out into the road, you can change the nature of your grip instantly.
Sure.
Because you're much larger.
Yeah.
Her weight is not going to overthrow your weight.
Right.
And so you can you can exercise power and just say no.
Yeah.
And God can do that with us too. There's moments of lightness and ease.
Yes.
There are also moments, in my experience, where it's like, I'm going this way, and God's just like, Yeah. And of course, you can disobey. If God allows us even to he respects us enough to let us disobey and choose our own path and have the consequences. But at least in my personal experience, there's been a couple moments in my life where God has showed up very eloquent. He said one word, no. And it's just like, oh, do you say anything besides that?
Yeah.
But
to hear that, you got to be close and in his presence and trying to be around him, right? we can exercise our own will and kind of like distance ourselves from God. And, but if you want to know his will, if you want to be in alignment with, you want your guys' our will and his will to be in alignment, like you have to spend time with him. You
Yeah.
have to be in his presence. You got to seek.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know.
And I think God's open. Like, I think there's often times where all that God's will is that we would inquire of him his will.
Yes.
And his reply is, I don't care, do what you want.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or he's like, either path is great. People always talk about a fork in the road, and I never understand because they're like, fork, should I go that way or this way? A fork usually has 4 prongs.
This
And
way,
I'm
this
like,
way, this way.
a fork in the road means this way, this way, this way, or this way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think God is often just like, you know what? They're all good.
Yeah.
Go for it. I
Try
don't care
it.
if you gossip at Chevron or Texaco or,
Yeah. Yeah. Man, there's a freedom in that, huh?
There is.
Yeah.
There is. And if your daughters grew up and never got to the point where they were like, always like, Mommy, what should I do now? Mommy, what should I do now? Mommy, what should I?
Oh, I do have one like that.
Wouldn't they at some point, wouldn't you at some point say, dear, it's appropriate for you to decide yourself. You don't have to ask me.
Yeah.
So there is a certain freedom. Like I've heard this one saint who says, you don't pray about the obvious. Should I go help that person? God, let me ask.
Right.
You don't pray about the obvious. Do it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So have there been any big moments in your life where like there seemed to be like a puzzling relationship between God's will and your will? And how did that turn out for you?
I think it's often when there's like I sense change coming, or like I'm in a place of change, and where that's like just uncomfortable. And sometimes in those moments, that's when I'm like, God, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And it's would be work or timing for a certain thing. So that's when I find myself asking these questions more. But kind of like what you just touched on, like, if it's like, should I do this nice thing? Like, yeah, of course you should. Like, just do it. Just do the thing. Like, I've given you a brain. I've given you a heart. Please go exercise and use it.
Mm-hmm.
But like, as far as like those big ones, those have just kind of organically come, and I am just trusting, I am going to inquire of the Lord, and what happens, happens. And I'll just keep making the best decision one step at a time. And I know God will produce good fruit from this. And I guess that's where I'm at right now, just in a place of like trusting. I'm going to try and do the best thing as I can, one decision at a time.
That sounds awfully a lot like Christian maturity to me.
I don't know.
I'll diagnose that in you.
Yeah.
You don't have to self-diagnose.
Where's Sarah? Bring her back.
I'll diagnose that in you.
Thanks.
You're in danger of becoming mature.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I think, again, and maybe we'll end here, back to this idea of like, it matters who you're becoming.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And in my experience, like, there have been some crushing moments where I'm strong-willed.
Mm-hmm.
And there's been some moments where I'm like banging heads with God. And those moments, in hindsight, the specific issue seems so silly. But that wasn't the issue. The issue wasn't the issue. The issue was Ryan's heart and how Ryan is going to approach a conflict between what I see and what God sees. And I find myself moving towards your position of trust. But then what it does is it sure makes more complex questions of ambition or striving or why am I even doing it if it's all in God's hands? So I think these are like issues that you live with and you journey with and you learn step by step. Like life's like a spiral.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like you take obedience 101 and then you come back around to obedience 201 and 301 and 4. It's the same basic motion. Yeah. And yet sometimes it's like, well, the stakes are higher. It was puzzling last time. It's still puzzling this time. I have been here before. Mm-hmm. and it's like, I have to keep learning the same lesson. But I think this is why spiritual principles are transferable. Mm-hmm. And, 70-year-old person can get up in the pulpit and speak from their heart of something they are going through in the background of their life. And it applies to the 15-year-old in the pews. Mm-hmm. Because life is spiraled like that. And it's like, they're at obedience 1301 and they're at obedience 201, but it's the same lesson.
Yeah.
And I can't wait to graduate. Just honest confessions. I'm super excited for someday where there's no conflict between my will and God's will.
Oh, Lord, let it be. Yeah.
Yes.
Agreed.
Well, until that day, just keep on keeping on.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
All right. Well, if you guys found today's conversation helpful to you, please like, comment, share, do all of the things. Share it with your friends and get the word out about the Deeper podcast.
Amen. We're located in the California Bay Area. We're part of the Bay Church, got several campuses. Would love to see you sometime. Check out thebay.church, and that will give you all the information that you need. And until next time, be well. And as the ancient rabbis say, shalom, me homies. Take care. Bye-bye.